Hey, so after the last devlog that I did, I had a couple of people asking me how I wrote the story for my indie game, and also just like general questions about how I write. I think because of the way that video was titled, people thought that that was what the video was going to be about in the first place. That video was more so focused on how specific story changes allowed me to make the game better and more complete, but I am perfectly happy to talk about just, my general story writing tips and whatnot here. So let's get started, but first, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Saul. I am the creator of the Summoner's Nexus TCG. I have more gray hairs than I should at the age of 27, but the Summoner's Nexus TCG is a digital trading card game that I built up from scratch that has real-time strategy elements and has a fantasy story sort of built around it, or I guess that it's built inside of, because the story came before the game. Let's get into the story tips. Oh, also there is a link in the description so you can join our Discord server and get involved with the community, play games, try out the TCG for yourself once it's out, so on and so forth. Actually, it might be out already depending on when this video comes out. I don't know. Now, I'm gonna try to make this as quick as possible while also following a somewhat logical structure. Now, when I want to write a story, I usually start with an idea for either a character or a scene or a setting, something like that. I don't know anyone who sits down and has like a whole story beginning to end sort of mapped out and ready to go. It starts somewhere, right? It would be cool to have a story just spring forward from your imagination with no prior or additional thought, but I just don't think it works that way. So I think of a character or I think of a scene, and then I ask the fundamental question that guides the majority of my writing, which is, how do we get there, right? That scene is really cool. That character is really cool. How do we get there? What happened to get us to this point? What happened to this person to make them into the person that does this really cool thing? I create what I like to call a story tree. I don't know if there's another term for that phrase, but for me, it is a logical series of events working backwards that inform, again, the setting or the character or the scene in order to make sense of what allowed these events to transpire. I'll do an example with you. It goes like this. So, our starting idea, there's a man who wants to kill God. Simple, straightforward. Okay, well, now we have to ask why. What happened to this person? What occurred in his life to make this his motivation and his reason for being? Now, I have a few options here, and this is where you start to have different diverging pathways and so on and so forth. I could say that maybe a god failed to save a loved one in a time of need. I could say perhaps this god made a deal with him and then cheated him out of it at the last second. Maybe this god has just been apathetic to his suffering and he is now fed up. Whichever route I choose to go down there, the flow, the world, the stakes of the story shift dramatically as a result. If the god failed to save one of his loved ones, and that means gods are expected to help mortals in this world. Now that could inform some kind of religion or power system. But the god failing to step in might mean that his powers were limited in some way. It would inform our hero's goal as a result of that, because maybe now the god is a bit sympathetic. If the god was apathetic or cheated him in some way, well, that is now an antagonistic force, which again shifts the flow of the story. Let's say I choose the first option because I personally feel like it allows me to do more and add more unique branches to my story tree as we move on. Good. Okay, so man wants to kill God. Why? God failed to save a loved one. Well, we have a couple new questions to answer as a result of that. Why did the god fail to save the loved one in question, and who was this loved one? Answering this question will also dramatically shift the tone and the themes of the story, because if it was his wife, for example, well, now we have to deal with the theme of love loss, right? If it was his brother, maybe it's a theme of brotherhood being explored. If it's a child, then it's just grief and loss in an all-prevailing sense, and what it means to be the one who gets left behind or outlives your children. I'd like to choose his brother because I really enjoy the theme of brotherhood in stories, but then we have to answer the follow-up question of, why was his brother so important to him? Or rather, who does his brother have to be in order for him to be so important to him that our hero would choose to kill God as a result of his brother's passing? There are a lot of different ways that you can answer this. It comes down to personal preference. For the sake of just ease of access, let's say that his brother was a very kind, loving, and nurturing person, which is what made him so endeared to our hero. Well, that also helps us to answer our second question, which is, why did the god fail to save him? Well, since we know a little bit about the brother at this stage, we can play around with that a little bit. We know that he is a good person based on who he needs to be in order to interact with our hero. So if he's a good person, he's likely righteous, devout. So if this is a world where people believe in God, he would likely give offerings to said God. But if he's a good person and he saw someone in need, I could imagine a scenario where he gives an offering that's intended for the God to a struggling person, maybe someone who's homeless or who just doesn't have the means to survive. This could do a lot of really fun things. For example, it could lead to a plot line where we view the gods as selfish and conceited for demanding these offerings from the people who worship and follow them, only for us to find out that the world doesn't work the way that we thought it did. What if in this world the gods are powerless to act on earth without an offering to give them passage into the world of man? That completely shifts the dynamic, because that means we as humans would have been viewing them through this very limited lens, not having a full understanding of what it means to be the divine. That would also mean that our heroes' goals are misguided, but look at what we're doing. We are now answering questions without actually needing to ask questions, because we have started to build a functioning world with systems and things that can be explored. And so it becomes easier the more that you do it. It's like learning the directions to a new location. Let's say there's something down the road that you want to go and do. Well, if you know the way to your friend's house, which is 2 blocks down the road, you just remember that, and then it informs you being able to go further out into the world. So we know a lot about this world already. We know that gods and humans can interact. We know that gods are expected to help humans in times of need. We know that gods and humans aren't very close in terms of their relationship, because the truth of their nature isn't known to mankind. That truth being that there are limits on their godly power. So if you do this enough, honestly, eventually you just start to realize that you don't have to think as hard to find the answers to the questions that you're asking. For each character in your narrative, you ask who they need to be or what they need to do for your main character to be who he is and do what he does. In truth, I tend to only create characters that initially serve this purpose. So we start with the main character. Who does he need to interact with to be the person that he is or do the things he needs to do? All right, well, we branch out from that. The mentor figure that is very wise and stoic, what did he have to encounter in life in order to make him that person? Was it loss? Was it grief? Was it just a passive lifestyle in general? We need to answer those questions because it informs the informant effectively. Right? I tend to do this for maybe 1 to 2 generations of informing the informant and going a little bit further back in history, because in one book, you're only going to have so much lore and so much information. You don't need to create a New Testament, effectively. It is enough to explain your protagonist's backstory, the people who are directly informing his backstory. Maybe you explain some of theirs. You could drop like a line or 2 about the people who informed the main character's backstories. But you see what I mean? When it starts to get too far removed, it stops working as neatly. You can do that for your own knowledge so that you understand it and that you know it. But in terms of the actual story that you write, that doesn't need to be in there. If you think of a scene, any scene, let's say it's 2 characters falling off a building, well, ask yourself, can they fly? What kind of person do you have to be, or what needs to be driving you to jump off a building willingly if you can't? What are they fighting over? Money? Then they're enemies. Betrayal? Then they were friends once. This is what makes creating a story tree so fun, and it's why I enjoy it so much, because people aren't islands. We are informed by our experiences and what we've encountered, and the same should be true of the characters that you write in stories. So this is just a very good way of reminding yourself to do that. I hope this was helpful and not too confusing, but if it wasn't, then please subscribe for more content around game development, be it story writing or just indie games in general, or if you're interested in staying up to date on the development of the Summoner's Nexus TCG, because the story is appealing to you based on what you've heard me say today. This was not the story of the Summoner's Nexus TCG, actually, but if you want to read something that was written by the guy who came up with that, subscribe. That was really smooth. Okay, bye.